Jesus every day. Sweet is the tender love Jesus has shown, sweeter far than any love that mortals have known. Kind to the erring one, faithful is he. He, the great example, is a pattern for me. Where he leads, I'll follow, follow all the way. Where he leads, I'll follow, follow Jesus every day. List to his loving words, come unto me. Weary, heavy laden, there is sweet rest for thee. Trust in his promises, faithful and sure. Lean upon the Savior, and thy soul is secure. Where he leads, I'll follow, follow all the way. Where he leads, I'll follow, follow Jesus every day. It's Tracy. This time, Leah is going to come with a song for us.
Hi, guys. Hi. Tonight, I'll be reading Psalm 6. O Lord, rebuke me not in your anger, nor discipline me in your wrath. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am languishing. Heal me, O Lord, for my bones are troubled. My soul is greatly troubled also. But you, O Lord, how long? Turn, O Lord, deliver my life. Save me for the sake of your steadfast love. For in death there is no remembrance of you. In Sheol, who will give you praise? I am weary with moaning. Every night I flood my bed with tears. I drench my couch with my weeping. My eye wastes away because of grief. It grows weak because of all my foes. Depart from me, all your workers of evil, for the Lord has heard the sound of my weeping. The Lord has heard my plea. The Lord accepts my prayer. All my enemies shall be ashamed and greatly troubled. They shall turn back and be put to shame in a moment. I chose this psalm because I think it's important to remember that God is always there and he always answers our prayers, even if we don't like the answer. And he knows that what we need to do, and he's going to guide us to do what he wants us to do because he knows what's best for us. Thank you.
All right. Tonight we continue on with our series on looking at these different mountains and what happened on them and then how it applies to us. Tonight we will be talking about the Mount of Olives. What do you know about the Mount of Olives? I'm sure you've heard about it several times. Yep, it's right across the valley on the east side of Jerusalem. I'm sorry? Nope, not where he was transfigured at. That's a little different area.
Is that where Gethsemane is?
It is, that's where the garden is, right there on that mount.
Where Jesus
It's where what?
Isn't that where Jesus Christ is going to come back?
It is. That's where it says in Zechariah chapter 14 that that's where he will return and his foot will touch the top of the mount, and the mount will split in two. We'll look at that tonight. Anything else you know about that? Well, good. We got a lot to learn tonight. The Mount of Olives is mentioned some 12 times in the New Testament, but only twice in the Old Testament is it mentioned by the name Mount of Olives. Other times it's actually referred to as the Mount of Corruption, and then we also see where it's just called the mountain on the east side of the city. Do you have any idea why it would be called the Mount of Corruption in the Old Testament? Well, good. We'll get to that too. All right. So let's look at some Old Testament references to the Mount of Olives and see what is happening there. If you would go to 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel. Second Samuel chapter 13. All right, in 2 Samuel chapter 13 is a story that you may have heard before. It's not something we spend a lot of time on. It's not something that people like to mention about what happened in the Bible here. But here in chapter 13, just to give you an overview of it without reading every single verse, if you look there in verse 1, it says, "After this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar, and Amnon, the son of David, loved her." So that's to set all this up. Absalom and Amnon, of course, they have the same father, which is David, and they have different mothers because David had multiple wives. So they are half brothers. Absalom has a sister, Tamar, and that is his full sister. They have the same mother and the same father. But Amnon loves Tamar, his half sister, so much to the point to where it's almost like he is ill. He loses weight because he is so obsessed with this of being in love with his half sister. And so his friend comes up with this plan for him. You should pretend that you're ill, and then when your father, David, comes to see you, request from him that he send Tamar to bring you food and to care for you. And then that's the trap. Now that she is there in your bedroom, do what you should not do with her. And that's what happens. Amnon pretends to be sick. David comes see him, and he asks David, "Please send Tamar to care for me and to bring me food or to make cakes for me." And she does, and Amnon takes her. Tamar begs him not to, but the word is clear that Amnon was stronger than her and forced her, and he raped her to come down to it. Absalom learns of this, and he is furious that his sister has been raped by his half-brother. And so Absalom comes up with his own plan, and he kills through his servants. When Absalom gives the word, his servants kill Amnon. Now David is distraught. He's lost his one son is murdered. A daughter has been raped by her own half-brother, and then his other son is the murderer of Amnon. So he sends Absalom away and pretty much banishes him. And Absalom has a friend who has the ear of David, and he convinces David to let Absalom come on back. That's in chapter 14. It's Joab. You'll see there in 14 verse 1. Convinces David, let him come back. And so he lets him come back, but he says he can come back to the city, but I do not want to see him. And so Absalom gets to come back to the city, but David, they never see each other face to face. Joab again goes to David, says, you should make this right. We should get this together, father and son. And David agrees to it, and so he brings Absalom back, and he forgives him. Absalom, on the other hand, now that he's back in Jerusalem, he's been restored to favor. He has this new freedom, but it's not enough for him. He wants the throne. And all through chapter 14, he is planning to get David's throne. If you look there in chapter 15, you're going to see his treason, and that's where we're going to start focusing at for a moment. In 2 Samuel chapter 15, I'm telling you all this to set up where we're going to on the Mount of Olives, or Mount of Corruption, as it's going to be called eventually. In chapter 15, verse 1, it says, after this it happened that Absalom provided himself with chariots and horses and 50 men to run before him. So this is, now that he's come back to the kingdom, now that he's been accepted back and restored, now he starts to build his own little kingdom. And in verse 2 it says, now Absalom would rise early and stand beside the way to the gate. So it was, whenever anyone who had a lawsuit came to the king for decision, that Absalom would call to him and say, what city are you from? And he would say, your servant is from such and such a tribe of Israel. Then Absalom would say to him, look, your case is good and right, but there is no deputy of the king to hear you. Moreover, Absalom would say, oh, that I were made judge in the land, and everyone who has any suit or cause would come to me, and I would give them justice. And so it was, when anyone came near to bow down to him, that he would put out his hand and take him and kiss him. In this manner, Absalom acted toward all Israel who came to the king for judgment. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. So what's he doing in these 6 verses? He is a politician through and through. He gets up early in the morning and goes to the city gate. And everybody that comes through there that has a complaint or has a lawsuit or has something to say to the king, he'll say, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from such and such tribe in Israel. Oh, if only we had somebody to hear your case, because you have a good case. But if we had somebody, and if that somebody was me, then I would make sure justice is brought to you. So he is winning over the people. And then anytime somebody bows to him, he's taking his hand out and he's kissing them. He's treating them, oh, you don't have to bow to me. I am one of you. So he has stolen the hearts of all of Israel. His name is being spread all throughout. And now Israel is thinking, what if Absalom was our king instead of David? What if we had somebody like Absalom? And the plan works. Absalom, being this politician, he's going to take David's seat. It's not pretty how he does it, but he eventually does. He sets up this princely court. He starts adjudicating for the people. And then he asks David, he says, I need to go back to Hebron. And he goes, I need to go back to Hebron and fulfill this vow that I made to the Lord, even though there really wasn't one. And so David lets him go to Hebron. And when he goes to Hebron, when Absalom goes into Hebron, the people are crying out, Absalom reigns in Hebron, pretty much saying, this is your city, and you are our king. And that really starts the domino effect. And David is eventually on the run, and he begins to flee. All this is because, well, why is all this happening? Why is there so much conflict in David's family? Why is he now on the run, even though he was the king? God told him this would happen right after what? After Bathsheba. Remember, David sinned, and he sinned greatly. Not only adultery, but he murdered Uriah, which is Bathsheba's husband. He lied about it, tried to cover it up. He was confronted by Nathan eventually and confessed to it, but the consequence was still there, and David was going to have to pay. And the Lord told him that the sword would always be in his family, there would always be conflict, and that his own children would rise up against him. And this is exactly what's happening. So he was reaping the reward of his adultery, and he was soon betrayed by his family and his friend. He would be cursed by Shamil, and all this was happening. Now, you keep on going, and you'll see that David does something. Go back to chapter 14. Oh, I'm sorry. It's chapter 15. Chapter 15 and verse 23. At the beginning of chapter 15, Absalom has set up his court. He's stolen the hearts of the people. David knows what's happening. He finds out what's happening. The people are rising up in support of Absalom. Now David is about to go on to the run. In verse 22, he's setting the final things in order before he leaves. And then in verse 23, it says, "And all the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness." What has happened is the kingdom has divided. Some have chose David, some have chose, or majority have chose Absalom. When he's saying the people crossed over, it's the people who chose to leave with David. Some of his servants were very loyal, and some of his appointed people were very loyal to him. In verse 24, it says there was also Zadok also and the Levites with him bearing the Ark of the Covenant. And they set down the Ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had finished crossing from over the city. They're going to take the Ark with them. David says, no, take it back. It stays here. And so the Ark stays here, and David tells them, if the Lord brings me back, he'll bring me back, and the Ark will still be ours, but the Ark stays here. So the Ark didn't go. What I want you to notice, though, is in verse 23, it says, the king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron. That valley that we talked about right at the beginning, the valley that separates Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives is called the Kidron Valley, and there is the Kidron Brook there as well. And it says that he crossed over that, and all the people was weeping. Go down to verse 30, and it says, so David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and wept as he went up, and he had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. There in verse 30 you see that with his head covered and barefoot, David crossed the Kidron Brook, weeping as he went over to ascend the Mount of Olives and to go out into the way of the wilderness. Little did he know, but he was actually taking part in a prophetic picture of the greater son of David, of Jesus Christ, who would come some 1,000 years later, who would walk across this exact same brook, who had been rejected by his own people, just as David had. And on this same Mount of Olives, he too would be betrayed by someone who he had shared many a meals with, just like David had shared many a meals with his son Absalom. The same one that he had eaten bread with will be the one that betrayed him. And David here is 1,000 years beforehand. You see Christ doing the same thing, crossing the same creek, the same path, going away rejected, and going to the same place. And on this Mount of Olives, Jesus too wept. Do you remember when he wept? It was there in the garden, right? Which is right there on the Mount of Olives, where it says that he wept, and it says that where his sweat turned to blood. So amazing how 1,000 years before you see the same picture. But that's not the only time that the Old Testament mentions the Mount of Olives. Go back to, go to 1 Kings chapter 11. If you're in 2 Samuel, it's just a few pages over. 1 Kings chapter 11. Now we're going to see David's son, Solomon, and you're going to see what he does at the Mount of Olives. First off, this little side note, this is extra, no charge. This was a question that was posed to us when I was in seminary, and it always stuck with me. We know Solomon, one of the wisest to ever live, right? One of the wealthiest as well. King of Israel. Here's a question for you. Was Solomon a good king? Not really. I found that a lot of people will automatically say, yes, of course he is. He was the most wise, so he had to be a good king. However, Solomon was a terrible king, according to the standard that God gave. Do you know what the standard was that God gave for the kings of Israel? There were 3 things that they were to do and were not to do. No gods before them? Yeah. Solomon broke that one, didn't he? Yeah, wives and horses. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, it lays this out. In Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 14, it says, "When you come to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and possess it and dwell in it, and say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you shall surely set a king over you, whom the Lord your God chooses, one from among your brethren. You shall set a king over you. You may not set a foreigner over you who is not your brother. But he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again." So God says, you're going to have a king. Make sure that you set up one of your own. He's not a foreigner, but he's one of your own brethren. He is an Israelite, of course. And then one of the first things he says is, do not multiply horses. The king shouldn't be about being rich, and it shouldn't be about being wealthy, and it shouldn't be about gathering more and more horses. And he especially says, do not go to Egypt to get horses. You've left from there, don't go back. And then in verse 17 it says, "Neither shall he multiply wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself." So don't get the Egyptian horses, don't get multiple wives, and don't try to get wealthy being the king. And then in verse 18, perhaps the most important, "Also it shall be, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write for himself a copy of this law in a book from the one before the priests, the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, and be careful to observe all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted above his brethren, that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, and that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. So the king was to write a copy of the law in his own hand, and then he was to keep it with him at all times and to daily read it and study it and know it to prevent him from falling into place or falling out of God's way. You're in 1 Kings chapter 11. Look there in 1 Kings chapter 10. And look there in verse 28. 10:28, 1 Kings says, also Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Cabot. The king's merchants brought them in Cabot at the current price. So he breaks the first thing, right? He sends people back to Egypt and starts getting horses, and he multiplies those horses. So he's already broke one standard. 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 3. And he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. So he broke the second thing as well. He had Egyptian horses and multiple wives. And we have no record of him ever writing a copy of the law or of the law. And then we definitely see where he did not study it and read it every day because his life reflected that he did not know it and that he did not follow it. Because what you're going to see here in these verses in chapter 11 is because of his 700 wives and 300 concubines, and because his heart was turned away, because he went against the standard that God had set for what a king should be. Look there in verse 4 of 1 Kings chapter 11. For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon, and then he lists the gods there, the false god in verse 5. And then in verse 6 it says, Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord and did not fully follow the Lord as did his father David. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is east of Jerusalem. What hill is east of Jerusalem? It's the Mount of Olives. It's the one right across from the eastern gate, right across the Kidron Valley. That is the Mount of Olives. And that is where Solomon built all these abominations to false gods for his wives. And he turned the Mount of Olives into the Mount of Corruption that it is referred to. And that's what it's referred to. And if you go to 2 Kings chapter 23, 2 Kings 23, in verse 13, it's telling you the same thing. It says, Then the king defiled the high places that were east of Jerusalem, which were on the south of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon, king of Israel, had built for Atroth, the abomination of the Sidonians, and Chemosh, the abomination of the Moabites, and Milcom, the abomination of the people of Ammon. So you see where David put this beautiful picture of what was going to happen some 1,000 years later with Christ. Solomon, his son, turns that special place into the Mount of Corruption and sets it up as a place of abomination. And what this really teaches us is that in one generation, what you consider holy, what you consider special, what you may be setting up as a picture for the Lord for future generations, the next generation can take that same place and make it a mount of corruption, could make it an evil place and a wicked place. And that's something that we have to be on guard about, and that we must take every diligent effort in preventing. A sad thing that Solomon did there, and how he transgressed the law, he transgressed the standard of what God had set about for kings, and had taken that special place and turned it into that mount. But God wasn't done with that place. It didn't stay the mount of corruption. And that's where the beautiful part of this story comes in. One that was greater than Solomon, that being, of course, Jesus Christ. The place that Solomon had desecrated, Jesus is going to hold communion with his Father. He's going to pray to his Father. He is going to intercede here at this place. Here he wept. Here he prayed. And then we're going to see exactly what he turned it into. In Ezekiel, this is where it gets really, really interesting. The Mount of Olives is mentioned here in Ezekiel. If you would go to Ezekiel chapter 10. We'll close out with this here. But in Ezekiel chapter 10, this is Ezekiel's vision of the glory of God leaving the temple, leaving Jerusalem. In Ezekiel chapter 10 and verse 18, it says, "Then the glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the temple and stood over the cherubim." So you see the glory of the Lord, which was supposed to be in the temple and stay in the temple, it comes out of the temple and it leaves there. And then you keep on going. In verse 19 it says, "And the cherubim lifted their wings and mounted up the earth in my sight. When they went out, the wheels were beside them. They stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of God of Israel was above them." So the glory of God walks out of leaves the temple, goes to the eastern gate, lingers at the eastern gate for a little bit, and then where do you think it's going to go? In chapter 11, verse 23, of Ezekiel, it says, "And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain which is on the east side of the city." So the glory of the Lord leaves the temple, goes to the eastern gate and lingers, and then goes out. Where's it going? Across the brook Kidron, up the ascent of Mount of Olives, and is there at the Mount of Olives. This is the exact same path that who took? Jesus goes to the temple. He overturns the money tables. He cleanses the temple. He would walk out that same eastern gate and cross that same brook. And there on the Mount of Olives, he would ascend to heaven. It's also there on the Mount of Olives. They don't know the exact location, but Golgotha is somewhere in that area. So Ezekiel, having a vision of the glory of the Lord leaving, is also the picture perfect of Jesus Christ in his last week of life. The same path that David took, the same path the glory of the Lord takes, the same path that Jesus Christ takes. So that's why anybody who says all this is man-made, just a bunch of people made it up, you could not make that up. There's no way you could get all these writers from over thousands of years, all these different ones, and put them together, and to have such meshing of that. There's no way you could do it. It's either the greatest hoax in history or it's absolutely true. And I'm going to stick with it's absolutely true. There's no way that all that is by accident or coincidence. That Ezekiel, David, the glory of the Lord, you see what is happening. All right. So that was maybe some more stuff that you don't know about the Mount of Olives. Now the stuff that you do know, stuff that we mentioned before. As I said, that is the place where Jesus ascended. That's the place where he prayed. Possibly somewhere over in that area, that is the place where he was crucified. And it is also there where in Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 4 it says that he will return. He ascended from the mount of corruption, from the place where he was betrayed there in the garden. He ascended from the place where he was rejected. He wept there, was betrayed there. He was put under the weight of our corruption there. But he will return there, and it will not be the mount of corruption. It will not be the place where the king of Israel is rejected, but instead that is where the King of Kings will step foot, and that mount of corruption will be split in two, as Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4 says. It says, and in that day, speaking of the day of the Lord, says, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain shall move toward the north and half of it toward the south. And you can keep on reading there in Zechariah 14. You see where the people walk through that new valley. But the whole point of it is that he will place his foot upon it, and it shall split the mount of corruption. And the rejected one, the rejected king, will take his place as King of Kings. And that place that Solomon so desecrated is the place that we are so looking forward to see happen. God takes the corruption, he takes the rejection, he takes the betrayal, and he turns it into a place of hope, a place of salvation, and a place where we can look forward to going and seeing. Do you have any questions or any comments on the Mount of Olives tonight, or anything you want to add to it? Come.
I had the privilege of going over there a few years ago. And on the Mount of Olives, they have the model prayer, or the prayer one.
Yeah.
Anyway, the model prayer. It's like 160 different languages.
Wow.
And even what got me was there's also Cree and Cherokee on there. I mean,
Everything.
just no matter where you're from, where you are, you can read the Lord's Prayer on the mountain.
That's awesome. I hope to go one day. Maybe when things settle down a little bit. But that's awesome. Anything else? Mount of Olives tonight?
That point that you made a while ago applies to us in our days of life. We have to watch every generation, everything that they do, or we will let our Christianity and our faith, way of life, get away from us. Because every bunch changes the standards of what they want to do.
Yeah. Why did Solomon think it was okay to take so many wives? Daddy did it, right? All right. I mean, David done it. He didn't take that many, but David took multiple wives. So you can see it may start small in one generation and it compounds greatly in the
Well,
next.
you know, if you look at it, it's hard to understand what God's doing. But he works through a lot of people with a lot of different things. If you wouldn't think the way Solomon was, well, he built the temple, and everything like that. But, when you made that statement up there, what do you know about Solomon? Was he good or bad? I thought in my mind, yeah, he was fantastic. He built the temple. But that's just one thing.
Yeah.
He wasn't necessarily consistent all his life.
He wasn't, especially in his older years. His younger years, he was started pretty strong, but his older years, he went by the wayside pretty fast.
Let me give you one or two more. The most consistent thing about us is our inconsistency.
You got that right.
I hope when I get older, and I'm old now, that I don't get bad. I'm speaking for myself, I ain't speaking for everybody else.
He just loved women, and they led him astray.
Yep. And God, that's the thing, God even gave that warning all the way back in Deuteronomy. Don't take multiple wives, because They will turn your heart. And that's exactly what happened. Solomon probably thought he was being a good king, because every time he entered into a marriage, you saw where the Bible was specific that he said he had 700 wives of royal blood, that he was entering into all these agreements with all these surrounding nations, all these surrounding people, and every time he would take a wife, it would bring peace between them, and you had this little nationwide area, regional peace. Yeah. So he probably thought he was being a good king and doing what was best for Israel, but what would have been best for Israel would have been to do what God had instructed him to do in Deuteronomy.
When I worked at the VA, there was a couple of smart guys always trying to, get up on you. Why? Most people in the Bible had 3 or 4 wives at the same time. Look at David with many wives, but not a happy family.
No.
That was my answer to him. You just follow him. It's not a good deal.
Yeah, you don't see anybody with multiple wives turning out good. Yep. I heard a preacher say once about 700 wives, probably a lot to handle, but also 700 mother-in-laws as well. And if my mother-in-law's watching, she's incredible, by the way, which I know she does watch. All right. Yes?
Multiple wives, they're not marriages, they're contracts.
Yeah. And these are political contracts. Yeah.
So it's not a marriage.
Yeah. All right. Anything else? I hope you learned something about that specific spot, about the Mount of Olives. I hope you see it's mentioned in the Old Testament just as much as in the New Testament there. It's just in different names. Only twice is it referred to the Mount of Olives. You see the Mount of Corruption, or they say the hill or the mountain east of Jerusalem. But it's talking about the same place where Jesus ascended, there in the garden, where he was betrayed, in the area where he was crucified. So pretty important place. The whole point of it all, if you didn't hear anything else, Jesus takes the corrupt, turns it into good. He can transform anything. And he transformed that place just like he can transform us. All right. If nothing else, we will dismiss and get out just a little early. Do remember, I have 2 questions submitted to me, and they're very good, and I'm very appreciative of them. But I've only got 2. I would like to have at least a dozen or so. So if you have questions, write those down. Please get them to me very soon, because we're going to be starting that series, I think probably within the next 4 or 5 weeks we'll be starting that. So get those to me, please. Anything you want to know, write it down. Anything about the Bible you want to know, write that down. All right. If you would stand with me and we will dismiss.